Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us to learn more about the runaway struggle and how each of us can play a role to support vulnerable youth. This unique webinar will bring together 4 leading nonprofits that partner together to alleviate this issue. Today you will hear from experts from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, National Safe Place Network, National Network for Youth, and National Runaway Safe Line. My name is Jenna Reikabush, and I will be facilitating the webinar today. As the Senior Program Coordinator from the External Affairs Department at the National Center might be heard as NECMEC or the National Center. It has many acronyms. But my job is to spread awareness about missing and exploited children's issues, as well as to provide prevention resources to communities and trusted adults. We have a lot to discuss in the next hour and a half, so I'm going to go ahead and introduce our first speaker. Leamy is currently a supervisor within the Missing Children's Division of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. She works out of NECMEC's Texas Regional Office and supervises NECMEC case management teams in the regional offices located in Lake Park, Florida, Rochester, New York, and Austin, Texas. Leamy is a former prosecutor with the Manhattan District Attorney's Office in New York City, and I'm going to go ahead and pass it to you. And Leamy, if you could say your full name, it's a kind of tricky last name, so that would be great. And then I'll go ahead and pass it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the introduction, Jenna. And hello, everyone. My name is Leamy Kong-Sofer. I am a supervisor in the Missing Children Division, like Jenna said. In recognition of the National Runaway Prevention Month, I'm here to familiarize you with NECMEC, the resources of our center, and the Missing Children Division. So my hope is, after this webinar, you will be able to look to NECMEC as a resource and utilize us when needed. Next slide, please. For those of you not familiar with the center, it was established in 1984. We're currently celebrating our 30th year anniversary. We are headquartered in Virginia with regional offices in California, Florida, New York, and Texas. And our mission is to help find missing children and prevent child victimization. Next slide, please. So we operate under the federal definition of a missing child, which is listed here. A missing child is a person under the age of 18 whose whereabouts are unknown to a legal guardian. We handle 5 different case types by 2 different units as listed on the slide. In our critical and runaway unit, we handle the endangered runaway, which is any child missing on his or her own accord and whose whereabouts are unknown to a parent or legal guardian. We also handle lost, injured, or otherwise missing, any child where there are insufficient facts to determine the cause of the child's disappearance or circumstances put the child at increased risk. We have another classification in the non-family abduction, the taking, retention, luring, confinement, or concealment of a child by someone other than a family member. And then, as listed up here, we have the family abduction unit that handles family abduction cases, which involves the taking, retention, or concealment of a child by a family member in violation of a custody order, a decree, or other legitimate custodial rights. And just to give you an idea of the breadth of the runaway issue, what we saw in terms of numbers between the years of 2009 and 2013, out of approximately 57,000 cases we received, 81% were our endangered runaways. The next largest case type was family abduction at 15%. An additional drill down of our endangered runaway numbers during the same 5-year span reveals that more than half of the cases reported to us involved children running from foster care or group home, essentially social services care. We saw that the listed guardian in 53% of the 57,000 runaway children that we handled was in social services or foster care. Next slide, please. We also found that there is a high risk of child sex trafficking victimization, and that in 2013, 1 out of 7 endangered runaways reported to us were likely sex trafficking victims. Additionally, in taking a look at almost a 10-year period of time from January 2004 to June 2014, we saw that more than half of our likely child sex trafficking victims, 60% were in social services or foster care when they ran away. For those of you on the front line who are fully familiar with all the reasons why these children are so vulnerable to recruitment, here at NECMEC, we came up with a system of flagging not only those likely being trafficked, but also those who are at risk of child sex trafficking victimization. We heavily monitor our at-risk cases and assign repeat runaways to the same case management team so that we get to know the child, their habits, maintain relationships with the parents, guardians, social workers, and also in response to growing awareness about the issue and growing need, we created a child sex trafficking team. Next slide, please. So as revealed on this particular slide, we utilize a coordinated approach to analytical and case management support for any reports, requests involving child sex trafficking. Currently, we have case management teams and analysts specially designated as child sex trafficking teams who focus on missing child cases involving trafficking. These teams work closely together to help law enforcement establish links among children, traffickers, and possible location. We also provide support for parents or social workers upon recovery. We very often engage these services even before the child is recovered to try and have everything in place upon the recovery of the child. Next slide, please. Just to give you an idea of how a case takes its path through NECMEC, when a case gets called in, this flow chart shows sort of the general track a case takes involving all case types, including runaways and child sex trafficking ones. We've implemented a child sex trafficking specific questioning for the call center. We've also streamlined internal systems for proper identification of likely child sex trafficking victimization. Next slide, please. We try to obtain as much information as possible on the front end. Aliases and nicknames are helpful for social networking site searches. NECMEC also manually tracks scars, marks, tattoos, visible and cyber tip line reports that include postings from sites such as Backpage or any other online classified ad site. Analysts then compare them to descriptions of missing children reported to NECMEC. And then, in addition to the biographical information, we try to gather as much information as possible. And later in this presentation, I'll illustrate how pieces of information can be enormously helpful in locating a missing child. But we gather the items listed in the slide. And as mentioned before, social networking sites have become very, very helpful and important. It helps us gain information about subjects such as location, friends, activities, family members, usernames. It can help identify possible trafficking or gang-related activities. We can also often obtain photographs of people that we don't normally have access to. We also collect what we call endangerment information, such as medical or mental health conditions that the child might have, especially if they are life-threatening. Do they have suicidal ideations? Has there been online enticement? Is there a gang involvement? Are there any weapons involved? Our call center does an initial risk criticality assessment and decide whether a case manager should be immediately notified during or after normal business hours. Our case management teams are constantly doing risk assessments on their cases and collecting information that will be helpful in identifying what resources we need to deploy or utilize. Next slide, please. One of our most visible resources is the NECMEC poster. These are the basic requirements of what we need in order to be able to do one. We need a waiver from a parent, guardian, or law enforcement. Unless there is a memorandum of understanding in place, then we do not need a waiver. Currently, with social services agencies, we do have an MOU in place in Florida, LA County, and now Texas. Next slide, please. We're able to effectively utilize our posters by our photo distribution network. We currently have access to over 250 photo partners. Through our Velasquez Red Plum partnership, we've been able to reach about 100 million households each week across multimedia channels. Walmart has featured posters in over 4,600 stores. We also have a PR and communications department. They proactively engage various media outlets, whether it's a critical case that needs immediate attention, a cold case that could benefit from media attention, or any case in between. They provide a variety of resources, including press kits, news releases, and interviews. We also have our website that is listed on the last slide of this presentation, which features our missing child posters. Next slide, please. For our critical case resources, we have our case manager on call 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. We also have what is called the Team Adam program, which provides rapid on-site assistance to law enforcement agencies and families. They're retired law enforcement. We have about 70 consultants currently. And in serious cases of missing children, they can provide search and rescue assistance as well as landfill search assistance. Next slide, please. We also continue to work on cases even if the child has aged out of the system. We have a forensic imaging unit as well as a forensic services unit. We're able to do age progressions and also assist with biometrics collection. Next slide, please. Just to give you an idea about what NAMUS is, in the fall of 2009, NCMEC began entering cases of long-term missing children into the NAMUS database, the National Missing and Identified Persons System. All active runaways are entered after a certain period of time. We also receive child cases entered into NAMUS. And through partnership that we have with the University of North Texas, we help to provide DNA collection kits to law enforcement, and each profile is sent to them for profiling and then uploaded into the National DNA Index system where it is proactively compared with other profiles in the database. Next slide, please. We have another program called Project Alert. We currently have about 150 Project Alert volunteers who are also retired law enforcement. They provide technical assistance in long-term missing investigations. Just to give you an illustration of the kind of assistance that we're able to provide, we had a case where in December of 2008, we had a 16-year-old girl run away from foster care placement after becoming upset over the death of her father. When leaving, the child took her father's obituary and a picture showing herself and her sister and her father together. She did not take any other belongings or clothing with her. The child's sister at the time believed that she was a possible victim of child sex trafficking and was being exploited at various hotels in the Atlanta area. NCMEC was able to obtain the child's medical and dental records from her foster mother with the assistance with one of our Project Alert volunteers in order to be able to compare to unidentified remains. In July of 2011, partial human remains were in fact discovered in a park nearby from where the child went missing, and 3 days later were positively identified as belonging to the missing child by the local medical examiner's office. The remains were positively identified through the use of dental records provided through the child's NAMUS entry. Next slide, please. While that was a sad ending in a long-term case, we included that in order to just illustrate the scope of our resources. I do want to try to end on some success stories in which the child was recovered alive and safely. We had a case where a 16-year-old was missing from social services in Florida in 2013. We received a lead that the child appeared to be posting on Backpage. There were photographs that were found that appeared to be the child. A child sex trafficking team was assigned, and then they received a separate lead from Backpage that someone had emailed them about the child's ads. Our case management team then coordinated with the analysts who did a number of searches of the email address and telephone number associated with the ads. We were able to learn that the child was posting in California, even though she'd been originally missing from Florida. This information was provided to law enforcement in California and Florida. We were able to coordinate with the law enforcement agencies. Law Enforcement California followed up. They were able to set up a sting operation, after which they were able to recover her. The local district attorney who had worked with child sex trafficking victims before was aware of services for the child. We also had our program specialist work with a social worker to provide some additional ideas for counseling. Next slide, please. So just to hone in on the importance of information, I have a few success stories that involved each of these components. Telephone numbers, incredibly helpful. In one particular case, we had a 17-year-old who had run from a group home in Florida. The social worker was able to obtain a telephone number associated with the child. The case management team then facilitated contact between the social worker and the law enforcement agency who was handling the missing persons report. Law enforcement was able to identify activity on the child's cell phone and locate an address in New Jersey. They coordinated with law enforcement in New Jersey, where she was found in a motel room with a pimp. There, she was successfully recovered, and the pimp was arrested. Previous arrest information in terms of arrest records was also incredibly helpful in one particular case. We had a juvenile who'd gone missing from a foster home in Arizona. We had learned that she had a prior arrest in another state that listed her alias and pimp information. The social worker was able to provide this to the case management team. The case management team then asked that this information be entered into the NCIC database in the child's NCIC entry. A few months later, law enforcement in another state happened upon a pimp at a motel, ran his name, and saw that he had warrants for his arrest. The social worker had also given the case management team information about this pimp who had also been associated in this NCIC entry. A records check revealed that he was a person of interest for the missing child, and when he was arresting the pimp, the officer saw the child walking toward a room at a motel. After some conversations with the pimp, they were able to approach the child, who gave the alias that was listed in the NCIC. They were able to effectively connect the dots, successfully recover her, and arrest the pimp. In the vehicle tag information success story, we had a 17-year-old who ran from her group home in Florida. She was seen entering a vehicle of a listed companion who had been listed as her boyfriend. The social worker was able to provide information in terms of the license vehicle information. NCMEC then received a hot list alert for the vehicle tag. The analyst conducted searches surrounding the alert information, was able to locate an address that NCMEC then was able to send to law enforcement. Local law enforcement and the FBI were able to coordinate, go into the building, and successfully recover the child. This had marked her 31st run that we had registered with NCMEC. Next slide, please. So this is a summary of our Missing Children Division response to children missing from care. For chronic runners, we may be the consistent factor who can link, coordinate previous run information to law enforcement and legal guardians. We're able to obtain new information from each run or detailed recovery information that also might be helpful with future recoveries. Next slide, please. This is a comprehensive listing of NCMEC's programs and services. I greatly appreciate the time that you've taken to learn about the center and what we have to offer, and greatly hope that in the future we are able to be of service to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Leamy. That was great. And just to follow up with her presentation, NCMEC has a wealth of prevention programs and resources. My contact information will also be included, as with Leamy and all of our other presenters, at the end of the presentation. And I encourage you to follow up with us afterwards to learn more about the great resources that all of us can share with you. So that being said, I'm going to move along to our next presenter, Susan Harmon. Susan is currently the Director of Safe Place National Operations with the National Safe Place Network, headquartered in Louisville, Kentucky. She began her involvement with the Safe Place program in 1990 as the Safe Place coordinator at the YMCA Center for Youth Alternatives, now YMCA Safe Place Services. She later became the National Safe Place Training Director, and in 2013 transitioned into her current position, in which she works to expand Safe Place and provide training and support for agencies implementing the Safe Place Outreach Program. So Susan, go ahead and take it away.
All right, thank you very much. It really is a pleasure for me today to be able to be part of this group as we focus on runaway prevention work and what our organizations do on behalf of this nation's vulnerable youth. I'm pleased to be able to share some information about what National Safe Place Network is about and what we are doing to be able to help in this effort. Next slide, please. National Safe Place Network is a not-for-profit agency helping young people in need of immediate help and safety. The NSPN also provides training and technical support for youth and family services organizations across the country. Our mission is ensuring an effective system of response for youth in crisis through public and private partnerships at a local, state, and national level. This is done by licensing Safe Place programs in communities across the United States, promoting our Text for Help program nationally for all youth to use to locate a safe place site or other local resources, or to be able to text interactively with a master's level mental health professional. And we also do this by providing growth, development, education, professional training, and youth advocacy work to agencies working with youth and family services in need through our membership opportunities. Next slide. Safe Place is the original program within our organization, and it began in Louisville here in 1983 as the outreach program of the local runaway and homeless youth agency. The problems were that calls were coming into the shelter from young people who needed help, but they didn't have an easy way to get to the shelter. So our solution was that we would create locations, businesses and community buildings as safe place sites so that any youth in crisis could easily access that immediate help and safety right there in their own neighborhood or wherever they happen to be. Staff and qualified volunteers would respond to the youth and bring them to the shelter for help. Next slide. So in addition to coordinating Safe Place nationally and providing youth a safe place to go, National Safe Place had provided quality training and technical support for youth and family services organizations. And in the fall of 2013, National Safe Place and the Youth and Family Services Network, which was formerly the Southeastern Network of Youth and Family Services, we joined together to form the National Safe Place Network, or NSPN. The two organizations had a long-standing relationship going back to the days before Safe Place was even being replicated nationally. And over the last 10 years or so, our two organizations had co-hosted 3 major conferences and collaborated on several other projects. So in 2012, prior to the merger of our two organizations, NSP and YFSN collaborated to apply for and then assume the operation of the Family and Youth Services Bureau, or also known as FISBE, the Runaway and Homeless Youth Training and Technical Assistance Center, which is also known as RITAC. Next slide. So in addition to coordinating the National Safe Place initiative and providing training opportunities, NSPN also operates the FISBE Runaway and Homeless Youth Training and Technical Assistance Center and HTR3, which I'll talk about in just a second, to provide specialized services to runaway and homeless youth grantees. Next slide. The Family and Youth Services Bureau Runaway and Homeless Youth Training and Technical Assistance Center, it's funded by the Department of Health and Human Services Family and Youth Services Bureau. Again, we typically call that FISBE, and it's operated by the National Safe Place Network. RITAC provides training and technical assistance, which is the TNTA in RITAC, to more than 600 FISBE-funded runaway and homeless youth, or RHY, programs. The TNTA services are designed to supply the RHY programs with the necessary tools and information for them to be able to provide high-quality services. These tools include, but they're not limited to, the online training, facilitated and recorded webinars, on-site training, phone consultation, online resources, networking community, and an annual national conference, and a whole lot more. Ultimately, these services lead to positive outcomes for children, youth, and families in the local community. Next slide. So HTR3 is another effort that NSPN coordinates. This is intended to provide training for youth service providers to help improve their work with survivors of human trafficking. RHY service providers who may come into contact with youth involved in human trafficking need to be able to have a basic understanding of human trafficking in order to accurately identify the victims and provide appropriate and trauma-informed services. The human trafficking framework that NSPN has created to support this initiative focuses on the following areas. We have recognition, respect, and response. The project is officially identified as HTR3 to reflect the 3 human trafficking focus areas. In October of 2013, NSPN received a 1-year federal grant to provide this training to more than 400 federal RHY grantees. This project has been extended with additional funding through the fall of 2015. Next slide. Through our NSPN membership program, we offer a unique set of benefit packages that are designed to meet the needs of youth and family services organizations across the country beyond what is included in our other programming. These 3 different membership packages include organizational development, professional development, and training. So those are the 3 membership packages that the National Safe Place Network provides. Next slide. So Safe Place is our original program, and it began in '83, as I mentioned earlier. We partner with local youth serving agencies across the country, providing a safety net for youth in crisis. The simple concept of providing additional front doors across a community became a national effort that now encompasses hundreds of communities across the country. And the hope is that the Safe Place symbol will be a recognized symbol of help and safety for any youth seeking help. Next slide. So I want to talk a little bit about how it works. A youth in crisis can simply walk into a location or board a public transit vehicle that displays the Safe Place sign and ask for help. That local site contacts the Safe Place agency in that community with information about the youth. The Safe Place agency will then determine who is best able to respond to that youth at the Safe Place site, and then calls the location back and provides the name of the volunteer or the staff member who will be responding. That person then arrives at the Safe Place site, shows identification, and meets briefly with the youth. If necessary, that youth can be transported to the local youth service agency where they're able to receive counseling, shelter, or whatever other services are necessary. The young person can also be assisted in returning home if that is the appropriate thing. Next slide. So some of the stats that I wanted to show you here or tell you about. There are Safe Place agencies currently located in about 38 states and the District of Columbia. There have been over 150,000 young people who have been connected to immediate help and safety through Safe Place locations. There have been more than 160,000 young people who have received assistance by phone as a result of Safe Place outreach in the local communities. There are currently about 131 programs, Safe Place programs, operated by the youth service agencies across the country, and that also includes a few communities that have a Safe Place designated shelter, where they're just a Safe Place shelter site only in that community. There are over 19,000, just under 20,000 Safe Place sites available across the country, and over 1,400 different communities that are served by those agencies. And then another interesting statistic is that there have been well over 12 million young people who have learned about Safe Place and local agency services through presentations that the agencies have done. Next slide. Our Text for Help initiative, the Safe Place Text for Help initiative, is something that started about 2009. And in a couple of years ago, we added an interactive component of the Text for Help. A young person seeking assistance through Safe Place can text the word SAFE and their current address where they're located to 69866, and they will get immediate response. One of the things will be they will get the closest Safe Place site if it's a community that has Safe Place. It would be the Runaway and Homeless Youth Agency in that community if there is one available. They would also could potentially, if neither of those two are available, they would get the phone number for the National Runaway Safe Line. And finally, they can be prompted to be able to text interactively with a trained mental health professional. And so that is something that we're very pleased with, and we hope to be able to expand on that program over the coming months and years. Next slide. Some of the information about the Text for Help. The states that have the highest usage for Text for Help are California, Kentucky, Florida, Alabama, and Texas. And the stats through September of last year include the fact that we've received over almost 16,000 texts from young people, and we have sent over 21,000 texts back to young people. Next slide. And that concludes my presentation. If you would like to learn more about any of our programs, we'd love to be able to hear from you. You can visit our website, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, or you can just call us. Our information will be at the end of the presentation, and we'd be happy to connect with you whenever and however it's appropriate. And thank you so much for participating today.
Thank you so much, Susan. It's really great to know more about what those orange Safe Place signs mean, too. I know I personally see one around the corner from my work, and it's very interesting and such a great resource. And I'm a mentor, so I know there are so many teens that need that, especially ones who might have issues at home or just anything else going on. So thank you again. I encourage everyone on the line to spread the word about Safe Place in addition to all the other resources that you hear. So that being said, I'm going to move along to our next speaker. Darla Bardine is the Executive Director of the National Network for Youth. Darla is connected to runaway and homeless youth providers throughout the United States and the youth that they serve. She is a federal policy expert and has dedicated her career to fighting for federal policies that are rooted in the real lives and experiences of people and communities. Darla enjoys working collaboratively to push for common sense policies so that all communities are able to effectively serve homeless youth in crisis. So thank you for joining us, and Darla, you're all set.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. So I'm going to be mixing it up, a little different topic than the previous presenters. I'm going to be talking about federal and state policy. So like you heard, I'm the Executive Director of the National Network for Youth. We have been around for 40 years. We're a federal policy advocacy organization, and we're a membership organization. We represent over 300 homeless youth programs throughout the country through our members and their affiliates. And next slide, please. And we envision a world where vulnerable youth have a safety net everywhere they turn, which creates positive and strong communities, one youth at a time. And it's a pleasure for me to be here with you all today. Hopefully you'll learn something. Next slide, please. So I just want to give you a general overview of what I'm going to be talking about. So first we're going to talk about definitions. Often we hear runaway youth, homeless youth, but what do we actually mean whenever we're saying those terms or using those words? And then I'm going to talk about the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act. It's the sole federal law that provides housing and services to runaway and homeless youth. Then I'm going to go a little bit over some state laws and how different state laws affect runaway and truant youth. And then I'm going to talk about the intersection between running away, being homeless, being involved in the juvenile justice system, being involved in the foster care system, and human trafficking. And then I'm going to end with talking about how community-based services are effective at both providing services to families, which includes reunification when it's safe, and also in providing safety and help for our young people. All right, let's dive in. So first we're going to talk about what do we mean when we say homeless youth. And there are different definitions of homeless youth depending on the federal program. Different federal agencies have different definitions. But when we talk about homeless youth, what we mean is a homeless youth or an unaccompanied homeless youth is an individual between the ages of 12 and 24 who are on their own, meaning they don't have a parent or guardian, and they lack a safe and stable living arrangement. For the Runaway and Homeless Youth programs, they only go up to the age of 21. And for the U.S. Department of Education, they don't specify an age, and they use unaccompanied homeless youth. But it's for the U.S. Department of Education, they're talking about young people who are enrolled in public schools. So generally, if you hear numbers or you hear the U.S. Department of Education talking about unaccompanied homeless youth, they're generally talking about minors, so school-aged youth who are enrolled in public schools. Next slide, please. And the definition of a juvenile status offense, I think often you either hear of a juvenile offense or a status offense, and it can be confusing. So a status offense is whenever it's a crime that can only be committed by minors, and it's when certain criminal behaviors are criminalized only because the person is under the age of 18, and there's no motive associated with the crime. So, in other words, it would not be a criminal offense or a status offense if the person who is engaged in the activity was 18 or older, considered legally an adult. And some examples of a status offense is running away, truancy, or violating curfew. So neither of those things would be illegal if you were 18 or older. Next slide, please. And the definition of a runaway youth is a person under the age of 18, so a minor, who absents, so leaves his or her home or place of legal residence without the permission of his or her family or legal guardian. So it's different states have different laws, runaway laws, truancy laws, any type of law that makes a crime because you're a minor. So any status offense laws are all state laws. The federal government does not deal with criminal statutes in terms of status offenses, in terms of criminalizing behavior for minors. So that's why we're talking about state law. So with the exception of 5 states, police officers can take a runaway into custody, and they do not need a warrant to do so. So if a young person has been reported as a runaway, the police can pick that young person up, and they don't need to get a warrant from a judge. Some states release the young people that they take into custody back to their parent or guardian, or they release them back, or they release them to a relative, or they take them directly to the foster care system, even if they weren't in the foster care system. And then other states take the young people to court, which is treating them as a criminal. And so other runaways, so running away is considered a status offense in 9 states. That means that a young person can be charged with an offense and locked up in a juvenile detention center for being a runaway. And the states are listed there: Georgia, Idaho, Kentucky, Nebraska, South Carolina, Texas, Utah, West Virginia, and Wyoming. Next slide, please. And state truancy laws interact very closely with runaway youth because many runaways also become truants. and I'll talk a little bit more about what is truancy. So most state laws require that youth attend school anywhere between the ages of 5 to 18 years old. And generally, if a young person has a certain number of unexcused absences within a given month, a semester, or a year, which would be specified by that state, then that young person would be considered a truant. And obviously, if young people have run away from home, they're most likely not still attending school, which means that a young person could be both a runaway and a truant. And if you're a habitual truant, you are often subject to court orders. You could be required to go to counseling. Custody arrangements could be kind of reviewed because obviously if a young person is running away or missing a lot of school, then there is likely a crisis or a problem within the family structure or within wherever that young person is staying. Some truants are sentenced to community service, or they have to go through some type of local review board. And truancy is classified as a status offense in 6 states. That means that the young person can be charged as a juvenile status offender and serve a sentence in juvenile detention. And the 6 states are Georgia, Idaho, Nebraska, South Carolina, Texas, and West Virginia. Next slide, please. So we do have a resource guide that the National Network for Youth, my organization, wrote with the National Law Center on Homelessness and Poverty. It is available for download, so we've provided the link here. And this resource, I think it was written in 2013, so it's fairly recent, but it is potentially a little bit outdated. But it provides state-by-state information about what state laws exist that affect runaway and homeless youth. So it will tell you what your state laws are in terms of status offense, running away, truancy, and all of those different intersecting issues, a young person's ability to consent to health care if they're a minor and homeless. So all of that information is available in the resource guide. You can download it, and hopefully it'll be useful to you. Next slide, please. So now we're going to talk about all the different intersections between all of these: running away, being homeless, the juvenile justice system, the foster care system, and human trafficking. So young people who run away or are kicked out of their home and do not receive housing or services are much less likely to go home. Usually runaway and homeless youth programs, if a young person is able to access a runaway and homeless youth program, they are assessed, families contacted if it's determined that it's safe and appropriate, and family reunification services are provided by that runaway and homeless youth program. And 69% of young people that access a runaway and homeless youth emergency crisis program, which we call a basic center program, does return home, or they go to live with another safe identified relative. If a young person doesn't access these services, if they don't exist in that community, then young people who are in crisis and alone and homeless are much less likely to return home. And when a young person is on their own before they're able to care for themselves, before they're able to support themselves financially and emotionally, are much more likely to become homeless and remain homeless. And foster care youth are likely to run away from foster care placements, especially when they enter the foster care system over the age of 12. A lot of young people who run away from foster care do so because they want to reconnect with their biological family. They don't want to be in the foster care system. They don't want to be in a group home or their foster care placement. They want to be back with their mom or dad or with their siblings. Other young people run away from foster care for other reasons. They don't feel welcome. Maybe abuse is occurring. There's many different reasons why. Also, many young people who emancipate or age out of the foster care system, whether it's at the age of 18 or 21, depending on that state, young people will become homeless after exiting the foster care system. And that's because of a myriad of reasons. Next slide, please. So young people who are homeless for any number of reasons often are spending a lot of time in public spaces for extended periods of time. And they lack the ability to support themselves and are just generally very vulnerable. And so this makes them really vulnerable to all sorts of crimes and abuse, including being preyed upon by adults who want to use them for their own benefit, whether it's sex trafficking or labor trafficking. And so many young people are swept up into the trafficking industry. I had done a survey to runaway and homeless youth programs across the country and found that many young people were sex trafficked, and other young people were labor trafficked. And young people were, a lot of the conversation is around sex trafficking, but a lot of young people were targeted for forced sales, magazine sales, door-to-door sales, because these homeless youth were offered a job, food, and a place to stay, everything that they lacked and desired. And they were exploited, and they weren't paid, and they weren't always housed well or fed. And so runaway and homeless youth are vulnerable to both sex and labor trafficking. Next slide, please. And also young people who are abused or who had experienced other types of violence. A lot of young people who run away because they had experienced abuse or neglect or severe family conflict. And they're very vulnerable to sex trafficking and labor trafficking, and they're more likely to commit crimes to support themselves, to commit crimes to get what they need to live. I speak to many young people who commit crimes to get food. So they'll rob a convenience store to get the food that they need because they're hungry and they don't know where else to access those basic life needs. And also, the longer a young person is homeless, their mental health deteriorates and their substance abuse increases because they're using and abusing drugs to cope with the pain and trauma of their situation, of their homelessness. And also because many young people spend time in public spaces and are more likely to commit crimes to live, they're much more likely to have contact with police and with the juvenile justice system. And they're much more likely to be convicted for offenses such as truancy or running away. Next slide, please. So what's great is that we have this federal law. We've had it for 40 years, the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act, and its history is really rooted in decriminalizing running away. It's part of the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Act. It's Title III of that act. And the whole purpose is, if we are not criminalizing and incarcerating young people as runaways, as truants, if we're trying to decrease the number of states that criminalize this behavior, because we've recognized that truancy and running away should actually be a flag that there's some type of trauma or crisis happening within that family, and that what the young person needs is help and services, not a criminal record or not a criminal response, then where are we going to place these young people? Where are we going to house them if we're not housing them in a juvenile detention facility? So therein entered the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act. Next slide, please. And the pillars of the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act is that it provides federal funding to provide street outreach, crisis housing and services for minors, known as our Basic Center programs, and transitional living programs for 16 to 22-year-olds, as long as you enter at 21. And the transitional living programs are for homeless youth who are unable to live anywhere else. So they are homeless young people who are in the transitional living programs. And these programs have been preventing exploitation and trafficking, and they've been helping homeless, exploited, and trafficked youth for over 40 years now. Next slide, please. There are approximately 400 runaway and homeless youth programs across the United States, but federal resources are extremely scarce. Unfortunately, the federal government, Congress, has only appropriated $115 million for all of these programs to serve all of the runaway and homeless youth in America. And so that's why many communities don't have runaway and homeless youth services, and they don't have beds or housing for young people and families who are homeless and in crisis. Next slide, please. So we're working on reauthorizing the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act. Technically, it expired in 2013, and so we worked in 2014 to have a bipartisan Senate bill introduced by Senator Leahy and Senator Collins. We had 14 senators join as a co-sponsor, and it was voted out of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and that's as far as the bill got in 2014. Next slide, please. This piece of legislation, it is going to be reintroduced this year in 2015. We can't just keep using the same bill. It has to be reintroduced for this session of Congress. And this bill makes some really important updates. It would increase the allowable length of stay for homeless youth and basic center programs to 30 days. Currently, young people can only stay for 21. And it asks for increased resources, increased funding for all the different programs that the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act authorizes. And it would also add a non-discrimination clause inclusive of sexual orientation and gender identity. And also we're going to be increasing data collection on human trafficking so that we can learn even more about the intersection between runaway and homeless youth and human trafficking in America. Next slide, please. Thank you. I am done. It's been a pleasure being here with you all today.
Thank you so much, Darla. And quick question, if some of our listeners want to do more to make sure that that bill gets signed, what can they do?
Yes, please visit our website. Right now, we have an action center under our public policy section. We're going to have a new website in a couple months, and it'll be under the Take Action Center. You can sign on letters, you can contact your members of Congress, and let them know how important this piece of legislation is.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That was such great information. I'm sure everyone on the line really learned a lot, and if you are passionate about doing something, aside from that, you can contact Darla. Again, all contact information will be at the end. So that being said, it leads us to our last presenter, Maureen Blaha, and hopefully I said her last name correct. She is the Executive Director of the National Runaway Safeline. It's an organization with the mission to keep America's runaway, homeless, and at-risk youth safe and off the streets. Under her leadership, the visibility of National Runaway Safeline and its awareness of 1-800-RUNAWAY has really grown, while support has steadily increased in both personnel and finances. New platforms to connect with youth and parents have been added, including text, live chat, bulletin board postings, and crisis emails, as well as an expansion of social media activities. So I'm not going to say anything more about what they're doing. Instead, I'm going to pass it over to Maureen, and please tell us what you do and how you do it.
Thank you, Jenna. It is really an honor to share this forum with national colleagues from across the country and to share the good work of the National Runaway Safeline with all of our listeners and participants. So next slide, please. What I hope to be able to do today is just talk a little bit about the statistics that we gathered in 2013 and help you to understand the services that we provide to improve outcomes for youth and those that support them. And then the really exciting opportunity to talk about the whole prevention initiative that we are involved with, which is our Runaway Prevention Curriculum, a free, evidence-based, user-friendly 14-module curriculum. So we're going to talk a little bit in more detail about that. But next slide, please. So we have been around since 1971, and we were first established in Chicago as Metro Help, and we became in 1974, with the passage of the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act that Darla talked about, we became the federally designated national communication system for runaway and homeless youth. And we are the only organization to ever have been awarded that distinction. In 2013, though, we changed our name initially as Metro Help. In 74, we became the National Runaway Switchboard. But in 2013, we became the National Runaway Safe Line to be more... so that young people had a better sense of really what we do. Switchboard really doesn't mean anything to young people today. And the Safe Line also helps to describe that we are more than just a hotline today. And so we are now known as the National Runaway Safe Line, still, of course, a not-for-profit organization. Next slide, please. So our mission, as Jenna mentioned, is to keep America's runaway, homeless, and at-risk youth safe and off the streets. And our vision really is that we are the go-to resource for America's runaway, homeless, and at-risk youth and their families, providing solution-focused support. One of the things that's interesting is with our calls in particular, about half of them come in from parents whose child has run, whose child is acting out. Sort of a parent might say she was adorable at age 12, she's now 15 and we can't communicate. And so we really do provide support for parents and guardians as well as providers of service to this population. Next slide. We have a set of values that have been part and parcel to our work since the get-go, and that's providing solution-focused interventions. We don't really tell young people what to do. We really work with them to come up with a plan of action. We offer non-sectarian support. We respect confidentiality. We are here 24 hours a day. And what is really brilliant about our model is that we work with volunteers who come into our call center, and we have about 130 volunteers from all walks of life, 16-year-olds with parents' permission through senior citizens, people that are ballet dancers or business owners or social workers, but they are all trained in our crisis intervention model, and it's a very holistic approach to providing this service. And one of the quotes that I really like to share with media is when I had asked one of our volunteers, really, why do you do this work with us? And her response was, because at the beginning of the call, she hears despair, but at the end of the call, she hears hope. Next slide. So we are available at 1-800-RUNAWAY and at that's the phone number, as well as our website is 1-800-RUNAWAY.org. Again, we are confidential. We're providing this 24-hour crisis line and are accessible anywhere in the United States and its territories. Calls are anonymous, and we have, again, a team of staff and volunteers who use our very effective 5-step model of solution-focused crisis intervention. So the next slide talks about our statistics. And in 2013, we made over 250,000 connections to help and hope through our hotline, online, and offline resources. For the callers, 49% of the youth were away from home. 23% of them had run before, and the majority, 72% were female. And it's important, again, one of the things I like to help educate those that are not necessarily in our field is around that concept that kids that run from home are not bad kids, but are kids running from a bad situation. Again, to build on what Darla said, this is not a criminal act, but it really is a cry for help in many, many situations. So the next slide talks about, again, our statistics in 2013, and this was from our callers, that the number one reason that youth contact the National Runaway Safe Line is because of family dynamics. And we've been around for 44 years, and the family dynamics every year is at the top of the list in terms of issues identified. And those in the field, that is not a surprise to you. Abuse, that is about 13%. That includes physical abuse, neglect, sexual abuse. Next is peer social at 10%, school, education 8%, mental health, economics, transportation, followed by alcohol and drug use, and the judicial system. But, the top real issues for young people are the family dynamics, abuse, and peer social, which include, the all-encompassing bullying situations that are going on for young people in our country. The next slide talks about the statistics in terms of our niche for working with the runaway and homeless youth population as well as those at risk. Most of our callers reach out to us within the first 1 to 3 days. And again, Darla talked about the longer these kids are on the streets, then they are less likely to reach out for help. Well, the good news is for us, these young people are reaching out early, which hopefully has a better outcome for them. Again, the numbers are sort of interesting that, we do handle calls from young people that have been away from home for a long time, but that's over 6 months. But that's, the least number of the statistic in terms of number of youth that call us at that situation. The next slide talks about, again, our myriad of services. In addition to the 24-hour hotline on our website, there is live chat that is open during peak times. That's 4:30 to 11:30 Central Standard Time, really when young people are not in school and maybe reaching out for help. We have a crisis bulletin board for not only teens but adults as well. We have crisis emails we respond to. We have our newest initiative, which is texting for help. And those online services are really growing quite extensively, as most of us recognize a lot of young people are not really picking up the phone and calling these days, but there are other ways for us to connect with them, always suggesting that we're here 24 hours a day and please give us a call. On our website, we have great information for youth and parents and educators. We have been able to get funding to do some great research. There's not a lot of research done on this population, but both why they run and in addition, this longitudinal study that really talks about some of those outcomes, not only why young people are running, sort of how they identify themselves, and then when you look at the adolescent longitudinal study and you pull out the statistics related to runaways and homeless and the struggles that they have different from other young people in terms of becoming successful, productive adults. And we have our wonderful runaway prevention curriculum that is free of charge for any community organization or school in the country. The next slide talks again about some of our prevention and awareness initiatives. it's great. We're located here in Chicago, and we have all these people that want to help us out by coming into the call center. But we had requests from people across the country saying, but what can I do? What is my call to action to help support this work and to support runaway and homeless youth? And we set up a street team. So it can be young people, a young person, it could be a family, that really helps us to get the posters and information out there so that anybody can play a role in helping to prevent the runaway situations in our country. The street team members earn points, and they get to, cash them in, so to speak, for pencils and T-shirts, and they post information through the posters, the kits that we send them, as well as many make a YouTube video, and it's a really great way to engage people across the country. We also have this really cool opportunity that's called Kids Call, where a classroom, for example, could set up a phone where they would call into our call center and have an opportunity with one of our frontline team members to talk about, well, what kind of calls do we get? And, if I were a young person and I had a friend who I knew ran away or was thinking, what might I do? And again, it's free of charge for anybody who wants to schedule that kind of learning and awareness. And to educate the public about solutions and what they can do to prevent young people from running from home. And in this year, the next slide talks about in 2014, some of the strategies that were used. We have this great toolkit, again, free of charge for community groups and schools and whomever wants it. Available on our website. This year we did a candlelight vigil that was held in cities across the country. We had a Wear Green Day and, said to people, send us your pictures. We're going to post them. And we tried something different in 2014. We did this thunderclap on November 27th, which was Thanksgiving. So kind of an opportunity for those of us having a wonderful family Thanksgiving dinner to think about those not so fortunate. And we were really quite pleased that over 300,000 people our reach was to connect with over 300,000 people on that thunderclap. So we will probably repeat that next year. The next slide talks about our information and referral, that is a database, which is quite comprehensive. Remember, we are, of course, nationwide. So we have over 10,000 agencies in our database that are responding to the calls and the online requests can provide support and resources to young people and their families. Anything from alternative schools to legal information to emergency shelters basic shelters for young people, as well as those teen living programs for older kids, to law enforcement support. The next slide talks about one of our, again, sort of interesting and unique services that we offer, and it's our message service. So a young person may be away from home and really not quite ready to reconnect with their family. They're not quite sure what the consequences might be. So they can call us and they can say, I have a message, and would you please deliver that to my mother? Well, we are able to do that, and then inevitably the parent will leave a message for us to give back to the child. So we suggest to the child that he or she call us back, later that day, maybe the next day, and we deliver that message. And then we offer for them that we will facilitate a conference call between the parent or the guardian and the youth to really begin to help mend that and open the doors to communication. And it's really remarkable the kinds of things that can happen. It also works in reverse, where a parent can leave a message for their child. We suggest that the parent then let all of their child's friends know that there's a message waiting, and we can do that message service in reverse as well, with the ultimate goal of facilitating a conference call. The next slide talks about the conference call that, again, could be between a parent and a youth that we facilitate, or it could be between a youth and an agency. If a young person calls us and is looking for a shelter, we will determine if there's a bed available, and then while that shelter is on the line with the young person, kind of facilitate that conversation so the young person knows what to expect when they get to the shelter, because of course there are rules and we don't want the young person to get there and run. Or if it's a case of potentially abuse going on in the home, we will encourage the young person to make a call to protective services, and we will stay on the call with them to really be their advocate. And when we are able to, provide that kind of support to the young person, it often is the difference between them making a report or not. On the next slide, we have this premier program that we've had since 1995 with Greyhound, and we call it our Home Free program. It's a family reunification program that provides a free bus ticket home for young people between the ages of 12 and 17, as long as, in that case, we need to get the parents' phone number to make sure that this parent will welcome the child back home, which really, in our experience, has been the case all of the time. And it's also for those older youth between the ages of 18 and 20 that we can send them, if not home, perhaps to a teen living program or another program in their area that can help stabilize them and help them get on the right road, so to speak. We also expanded the Home Free program to include the opportunity for the young person or the 18 to 20-year-old to live in an alternative living situation. Going home isn't always the answer, but there may be a relative or older sibling that's an adult that might be a better choice. The next slide talks again, it just adds a little more detail about the Home Free program, that it's more than just a bus ticket, because we have a conference call between the youth and the parent to talk about what happened and, how it might be different when the child returns. We provide resources in that community. And then we also, once the child returns home, we do call and say, how are things going? And we provide, again, resources in that community that could help the family mend. We were able to do some research on this program a couple of years ago, and what was really telling was that both the parents and the young person said that the most helpful aspect of this program was that conference call between the parent and their child that was mediated by the National Runaway Safe Line in getting them the free bus ticket home. And again, it's available. What we do need to make sure is that it is the young person that is calling us to make sure that it is their choice to want to go home and were able to get the free bus ticket. So the next couple of slides are going to be about our Premier Prevention Program, which again, it's called Let's Talk Runaway Prevention Curriculum. It has 14 modules, anywhere from making decisions to runaway reality to sexuality, sort of whatever you could imagine young people are thinking about and dealing with. And it's really about building life skills, educating about the young person about alternatives to running away, and helping them think about who in their community might be a trusted adult that they could turn to, be it a church member, a teacher, a relative or neighbor, and also to make sure that they're aware that the National Runaway Safe Line is available 24 hours a day. What's really great about this curriculum is that schools and community groups can either use one of the chapters, which are about 45 minutes long with lots of interactive activities for the young people, or they could use the curriculum in total, and it's really aimed at anywhere from 5th graders through 12th grade. And one of the facilitators of the curriculum had said to us that part of what she felt was so brilliant about it is that it does help young people understand that runaways exist, but it shows them that they are not the only people dealing with these issues. They are not alone in this. The next slide talks again about some of the benefits. It's user-friendly, really spelled out step by step. It can be used in large groups and small groups, used even by families. It's also a leadership opportunity that young people could do peer-led, lead one of the modules or more of the modules. And then it's got lots of other tips and worksheets and additional resources. The next slide talks about the development. We worked with DePaul University, did this whole search to see if there was any kind of curriculum like this that existed. This was back in 2007. There really is nothing else in the country like this. We have it also translated into Spanish. Once we launched it, then we were able to go back and prove that it is evidence-based. The next couple of slides, again, talk about all of the modules. I mentioned that there were 14 modules, communication and listening, family roles and responsibilities. The next slide talks about anger management, stress reduction, drugs and alcohol. So again, as I mentioned, there's probably not any topic that you could think of that wouldn't be covered in the curriculum. The next slide just kind of shows you the layout. On the first module we used as an example around communication and listening, very specifically talks about the goals, talks about the different activities that the facilitator can use, very clearly spells out what materials are used, and then gives a step-by-step on how to implement the activities, and then help to focus on the discussion. The next slide, gives more detail about all of sort of the pieces that are contained in just the one module, and this example was communication and listening. The next slide is really information about how you can get it. You can let us know that you want it on a CD-ROM, or you can download it from our website as well. And as I mentioned, it's free. So that ends my part of the presentation. Again, I am honored and pleased to be sharing the panel with everyone and to get information out there so that people really know how they can utilize the National Runaway Safe Line, and all of the services and programs we provide. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maureen. That was such great information, and I really think that everyone listening learned a lot about this topic, more about the runaway and the different risks that they face, the fact that these runaways are in fact children. I know Maureen and Darla and many of you talked about hope. There is hope. These organizations are here to help you with these issues and to prevent it. So now you'll leave with where to report, how to engage communities, and recognize communities that are already participating in things like the National Safe Place, really how to support the Runaway and Homeless Youth and Trafficking Prevention Act. That's another takeaway from there, as well as the prevention and awareness resources and curriculum that was just discussed. So just to wrap it up, I want to say thank you so much to all of our presenters. You guys did such a great job, and I really appreciate your time. I know the audience is so grateful for everything that they learned and can take away from here. If anyone would like to contact these presenters to learn more about their agencies and how they can help, please do so. Here's their information. Here's their contact information. If you're interested in getting a copy of the webinar, you can email me under the facilitator, Jenna Reikabush, and I'll send that out to you, in addition to other NCMEC-specific prevention programs and resources. So thank you again. I hope you all have a wonderful afternoon, and stay tuned for more great work from all 4 agencies.